Okay, you guys. Chapter 19, fossil fuels, impact, and energy conservation. This is going to be a little bit longer, but full of a lot of great information, things that I think that we take for granted all the time, and things that we kind of need to think about and look at. And so let's get started. So our goal is to talk about energy sources: coal, petroleum, natural gas, alternative fuels, and then talk about the impacts and ways of conserving. So ANWR, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, has been really on the verge so often of being entered and basically mined for petroleum, and it's been a huge debate whether they should go in there or not. And there's a lot of cons to going there. The pro would be there would probably be about 6 months of petroleum, which is not much, but the cons, in my opinion, far outweigh the issue there. And so it's been a fight for a long time. Just come up in the news just recently, where there was a big push to open that up as well. And I think it's been stopped. But, you know, the question is, do we drill or don't drill? And what you will find is that there's very little to gain other than about 6 months of petroleum, which is not, I think, 33 million barrels or something like that. Not very much over the long haul. So if we talk about ANWR, ANWR is the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It is such an amazing area when it comes to diversity. But if we start drilling there, what happens is we disrupt that diversity, and ultimately there will be a price to pay. And so that's why it's been such a controversial thing, and both sides very, very passionate about it. If we look at where the area is against the North Slope, it's Prudhoe Bay, and to get the petroleum where it needs to go, it accesses what's called the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. Again, that petroleum goes all the way to Port Valdez. Port Valdez is then shipped off. The interesting part about that is, as petroleum goes through a pipeline, it creates friction and therefore heat. And so that's another little side effect of what we're talking about. We are constantly using different energy sources. And interestingly enough, if we look at the ones that are out there, there are awesome opportunities, and we're kind of at that crossroads. And most people don't think about this, but back in the day, we were at this same crossroad. So if we look at our energy, where's the ultimate source of energy? It's the sun. And the sun, through photosynthesis and the heating of the Earth's atmosphere, creates all this to happen. And so solar radiation, fantastic, creates our winds, moves our currents, moves our oceans, heats our soil, and again, photosynthesis for chemical energy. Again, fossil fuels are the product of that, right? So we have all this biomass that has been converted over 150, 160 million years into petroleum. As it does, it becomes highly combustible. If we look at what's predominantly used for us, obviously petroleum is a big source of fuel for us. Coal as well, coal mined in Illinois. And then an up and coming is natural gas. And a natural gas is doing more and more because it's considered the clean burning fuel. But ultimately, what are we doing? We're creating electricity, and electricity then, every time we change forms, we lose energy and efficiency and our return on our energy investment. Renewable versus non-renewable. Renewable is anything that can be renewed within our lifetime. Non-renewable, anything that cannot be renewed within our lifetime. And so renewable energy, sunlight, geothermal, tidal, wind, water, those are renewable energies, and they are not going to be depleted by our use. Non-renewable, even though petroleum is one of those things that it can be made, the problem is 150 million years, and so it takes a very long time for it to replenish, millions and millions and millions of years. And so coal, natural gas, nuclear, it's something that takes a long time. Fossil fuels, what happens is we have material, organic material that gets covered over. Now, here's the deal. Depending on the type of material, it depends on the type of fossil fuel that's produced. And so majorly, all of our petroleum is made from phytoplankton and zooplankton that have died, and other marine animal organisms over the years, and it just falls to the bottom. It's covered over, and then with no oxygen or anaerobic respiration, basically because there's no oxygen, it has very little ability to break down. It's buried and eventually compresses to form what we call kerogen. Kerogen and that type of material, thermogenic natural gas, that forms petroleum. If it's a swamp and it's woody plants and things like that, then it forms coal, and we'll get more deep into that later. If we look at the issue, where are most of the petroleum reserves? They're majorly in the Middle East. Interestingly enough, back in the 30s, we actually helped Saudi Arabia and all these other countries find their petroleum or their oil. They needed water wells. They had a problem, didn't have wells for drinking. And so what ends up happening, the United States, who's good at water well drilling, comes over, and we actually help them drill for oil. And that's where I guess they just buy their water now. So United States, China, those are two really big countries for coal. We actually have more coal than anybody else. However, the reality is, hopefully, we will be phasing that out. Very difficult to phase out a commodity like petroleum or coal. And so what countries tend to do is they extract it until it's all gone. And hopefully we won't get to that point, but that happens quite a bit. Developed nations, we are one, consume a lot of energy, and in the form of energy that has to be produced. And so we use a great deal of fossil fuels in all sorts of different activities. Turning on the light, using our computer, driving to school, developing food, producing food in agriculture, whether it's driving a tractor or plowing a field, or taking that food and processing it. So we use a lot of that material, or a lot of fossil fuels in that manner. Now, with that being said, if you think about it, we used to be an animal-based society, agricultural society. Developing nations still do that. And so they're able to not produce greenhouse emissions and things like that, but they're using animals to do it, beasts of burden, basically. If you look at where everything's at, energy-wise, United States, Canada, very good examples of overusing, using over 6 metric tons of oil per capita. If you look at some of these other countries, why is Russia the way it is? Well, if you think about it, there's a lot of area there that there's just nobody. And then you've got China, Africa, South America, Mexico. These are areas where they just don't have connectivity, and we have just a beast of burden type scenario. Net energy, what is the energy return on energy invested? And so to figure out what net energy is, we are looking at extracting energy and delivering it to people. And so it takes energy to make energy. And so where we're at is we're looking at our energy return on our investment. And so energy return, go ahead. Hey, John.
Oh, are you recording something?
Yeah.
Oh, I apologize.
It's okay.
You can start over
No, I paused.
now. Okay. Hey, so I'm sending out an invite for liaison. Do we have that figured out? Am I sending it to a bigger group?
Return on energy on investment. Basically, we are extracting energy or petroleum or a material, and if it's easy, then your return on your investment is greater. If it's harder, then you have to spend more energy, money, etc., to extract the reserves. And so higher ratio means we have a higher return. So if we look at coal is pretty simple. Basically, I'm going to be putting a link. It's a couple 20-second long link, shows millions of years, 100, 200 million years, I don't know exactly, on the formation of coal. And so what happens is basically you have woody plant material that is covered over by sand and water. As it does, it builds up layers and layers and layers and layers of sand on top of these ancient swamps or forests. And what happens is eventually that compresses over a period of time to where you have coal being made. And there are different stages. So peat sphagnum moss is a mossy material like you would see in water that's just heavily laden with plant life. And eventually it starts to compress or it starts to die, go to the bottom, or it is constantly building up, building up, building up, building up. And then an event takes place and it compresses it, or covers over it. But basically what happens is it's covered over and there's no decomposition to the lack of oxygen. We've used coal for a long, long time, thousands and thousands of years. It is actually been mined since the 1700s. And so what happens is coal produces a lot of heat, and it's heat that's been stored up, energy that's been stored up over millions of years from those swamps. But what has happened is the Industrial Revolution was started by coal and being able to use that energy that was stored up in there. And it was somewhere in the 1800s, 1880s, 1890s that we start to see energy used to create electricity. And again, electricity being transferred through wires. Coal is extracted through a couple of different means. You have subsurface mining, so that would be like what Pontiac is. There was a coal mine in town where they removed the coal from underneath in seams and they dug it out. you have strip mines, which is very similar to what takes place in our mines for quarries and gravel south of town here. They basically come in, remove the top, and start removing the material from the ground. The overburden, which is the dirt, gets placed on the side, and then they bring the dirt back in. A real drastic method that actually is probably the worst is called mountaintop removal. Is when they know there's a seam there, they come in and they basically bulldoze the top of the mountain off and push it into the valleys. Very dangerous, very bad. This is a typical coal mine. Again, a shaft, vertical shaft with horizontal layers to be able to get at the seams. This would be a strip mine where we just take the whole layer off, and then we've gotten down to the bottom. Coal is dependent on how long it's been and how much energy or how much pressure and heat have gone into it. So again, I talked about it starts from peat moss. Sphagnum moss is its real name. And basically it compresses, whether it's a woody swamp, reeds, that type thing. But what happens is it's compress to where it creates what's called lignite. Lignite is the first stage of coal. Very, very poor as far as quality is concerned of heating. It's the least desirable. Then you get bituminous and subbituminous. Those are pretty much what we see, but it's when it's metamorphosed into anthracite, and anthracite is the most desirable type of coal. Again, it is compressed and it's metamorphosed, and so it has the most energy to it. So coal obviously has impurities in it from having all of it be just basically a swamp. And so there are lots of different things in there, whether it's mercury or sulfur or arsenic or whatever. Basically, it was a swamp, and so it has different types of impurities in there. And when we burn it, it goes into the atmosphere. And so basically, the burning of coal produces a couple of issues. One of them is that it puts carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but it also put pollution in the atmosphere as well. And so can be a big issue. Natural gas. Natural gas is an up and coming. It's really produced in a couple of ways. It's produced through production of coal, but it's also produced the production of petroleum. And so what we see is natural gas is probably the cleaner of the fossil fuels, if you can say that. We are seeing an increase in consumption. United States has a really big corner on this market, and so does Russia. Again, they're projecting the reserves to last about 60 years. When I was a kid, they said the petroleum reserves would only go to the year 2000. And so clearly it did not. What happened? We had better extraction techniques. Now, natural gas is formed in a couple of ways. Basically, it's methane, CH4. No different than the same thing that's in any gas, right? You break down anything, it forms methane. And so methane is a hydrocarbon. Why is it called a hydrocarbon? Hydrogen and carbon, right? Biogenic gas or swamp gas, we see this all the time. It can be burned. And again, I'll put some links to that on our Moodle page. But natural gas and biogenic gas, very similar in a lot of ways. Natural gas has been I don't want to use the word cooked over a longer period of time, but it's been able to do and become what it is because of millions and millions and millions of years. biogenic gas, it's happening all the time. It's not happening over millions and millions of years. Thermogenic gas, again, if we compress and heat natural gas, we get that thermogenic gas. And then kerogen, it's just coming from the breaking down of organic material. And so it's those bonds of the carbon and hydrogen breaking down. And we see it again in crude oil, and it's in the process. It's in the stage of creating crude oil. It's in the stage of creating coal. Coal bed methane, again, methane coming from that production of coal. And you'll see, like around here, we have all sorts of flares. So coal bed methane, basically it is from coal beds. It's leaking. I don't know if you've paid attention, but we have flares that we have to burn to gas off. Same thing with coal beds, same thing with natural gas. We have different types of gas that we have to get rid of, so they burn them off. Same thing too with the landfill. As it breaks down, methane's being produced, same thing. And so they burn that off as well. Natural gas basically is one of those things that came around in the 1800s, really started to see extraction of gas during that time, probably about the first it was ever done. When I was a kid, we used to have gas street lamps here in town where natural gas would go to all these street lamps, and they'd have a little mantle in there and a bag, and you would heat that, and it would stay lit all the time. Street lamps. Right now, if you think about natural gas, it's very, very heavily utilized to heat our homes and our water. Obviously, it's not hot water because we're making hot water. But again, United States and Russia pretty much are the biggest productions in this. And we see a lot of people talking about natural gas too because of something called fracking. That's how they get to it. Liquefied natural gas, or LNG, is shipped in tankers, tanker semis and trucks to go across the United States, but most of everything is put in pipelines. Really, extracting natural gas, again, is one of those things that they do simply by regular extraction techniques using a pump derrick. And again, as this goes up and down, it's using a pump, just like an old water well, that pulls it up. Fracking is a new technique which we crack the rock to get at the natural gas, petroleum too. But again, it's a method that's not really well received, and it's also sorry, I put my mask on. It's also bad for the environment. Offshore drilling, our platforms, we're able to do drilling and go in multiple directions from one platform now. And so as a result of that, our technology has gotten better. We can do right angles with drill bits. Now, that's the reason why I said that petroleum reserves, they were supposed to expire in 2000. They've kept going because we're able to still extract using non-conventional ways, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. If we talk about petroleum that's out there, when we talk about petroleum is phytoplankton and zooplankton maybe some marine animals, but mostly microscopic marine algae and phytoplankton. And basically, if you think about the ocean, there are organisms dying every millisecond of every day, and over a period of time it builds up, and so we've been using oil all around the world for a long time. I will say this: it is a finite amount of material. In other words, it will be gone. It will go away. And so, when did we start seeing oil? Well, it's been around for millions of years, aka tar pits. But really, it was about the mid 19th century that we start to see people utilizing this. Now, here's the deal. It was more used as lubricant type material or used in lamps. But it really wasn't. It wasn't until the I would say late 1800s, early 1900s that we started using it for transportation. Edwin Drake drills the first oil well in 1859 in Titusville, Pennsylvania. Since then, millions and millions of oil wells have been drilled. If you go into southern Illinois, lots of them down there. If we look at who holds the production, Saudi Arabia, again, we help them find their oil wells. We lead the world in consumption. Russia is second. China is second in consumption. United States is third in production. Japan, third in consumption. And so when we think about what we produce and what we consume, we are far exceeding everybody else. And that's what I find interesting. Problem is the rest of the world is starting to come up to that level. And so we are consuming more and more all the time. If we look at geology deposits, we are using drilling methods called core methods to look for deposits in the ground. And that way, basically, we, as I mentioned before, they've estimated that ANWR's basic deposits are somewhere in the 30 billion barrels. And again, it's not very much. On here, I've got this 33 months at current consumption rate. It's more like 6, I think, months worth of material, but I could be wrong. Basically, it's not a long period of time. It's a consumption rate of 6 months to a year, and so the costs outweigh the benefits. If we think about how oil is recovered and extracted, it's like sticking a straw into the ground, into an area that has capped off, and then sucking it out. Not all of the oil will be extracted. Some will continue to be made. And so one of the things that they do is they try and find these oil deposits through seismic surveying. And basically they send a signal into the ground, and as it reflects back, they're able to see where these domes are that are trapping this petroleum product. And so using that method, they're able to determine where the petroleum or the oil or the fossil fuel is. Now, using boreholes, they detect whether something is there. A geologist then reads the record, and they determine whether to extract the petroleum or material from there. This is a typical oil rig. As you stick a drill into the ground, you then pull up the oil that's under the cap rock. In this case, they're injecting seawater into this well to kind of push all of the oil out. And they're removing material. This is called primary extraction, where they're just sucking it out. This is called secondary, where they're injecting the seawater into there to push the oil out. What do we use petroleum for? Everything. Everything we have petroleum products. And so I think people would argue that if we can find a way to save it for things that are needed, so instead of single-use plastics, let's use stuff for renewables and use that plastic in a better way. Plastic and petroleum and all these other things are amazing substances, but we're using them at a rate that they won't last. The reserves to production ratio, we are far past the halfway point. We basically, according to our latest figures, have about 40 years of oil left. And the reason why I bring this up is we are starting to see an issue. When I was a kid, I remember the oil embargo in the early 70s, where in order to get a tank of gas, we had to wait in line for blocks and blocks here in Pontiac, and people would run out of gasoline. And so I think you'll find is we're going to be facing a global crisis at some point that is off the chart, because we're going to be running short. So if we look at where we're at, we are starting to see a production decline. And as a result of that, once our reserves are depleted, it will be a problem. What a geologist by the name of M. King Hubbard, they call Hubbard's Peak. Hubbard's Peak said that the peak production of oil would be around 1970. Problem is that was true. And so as a result of it, we are now in a very, very big downward spiral. If we look at where things are, again, in our lifetime, it will be gone. Maybe not mine, but most definitely yours. If we look at oil production, where it's at, depending on where it's produced, again, we are still at that point of we are past the peak of oil production. And so once we go past that peak, then we have to figure out some issues and how to solve them, right? And so untapped reserves, what are the consequences for us to continue? These are all big questions. And as our supplies dwindle, it will start to wonder about our national security as well. And so right now, in order to combat that, again, extraction methods are changing. So we have things called oil sands and shale tar. What basically happens is in this dirt, this sand, oil is there, but what they do is they then come in and they process this dirt and extract the petroleum from that. Very, very expensive to do, poor in quality as far as the hydrocarbons are concerned. And so it takes a lot to process that. And so our return on our investment for our energy is not as good as it is if it's just extracted. Oil shale, like I talked about just a minute ago, basically is the same thing. They remove it and turn it into liquid petroleum, but it takes a lot of energy to do so. Methane hydrate's really cool. Methane hydrate is methane that's been produced underneath the ocean in very dense pressure. And so what happens is, as it comes out it then produces a crystal. It produces a solid, and it burns incredibly well. Problem is we're releasing that. Some people think that this is why the Bermuda Triangle is as dangerous as it is, because what happens is you have this giant methane release in the Bermuda Triangle. The gas goes up, goes into the combustion engine of a plane, and the plane blows up. I don't necessarily know that's true or not, but that's a theory. Kind of a cool theory. So we are now looking at, where are we going and how are we going to get away from fossil fuels? And it doesn't matter what type of fossil fuel you're using, whether it's tar sands or oil shale, basically, or petroleum or coal or whatever. They're all releasing carbon into the atmosphere, pollutants in the atmosphere. But there are even worse things that go along with that, which is in the extraction methods, and then pollution as a result of energy put into the processing of it. And so there's all sorts of different issues environmentally, as well as our return on our investment. And so if we look at fossil fuel emissions, good example is here's our total emissions over a period of time. Oil seems to be the high one. Natural gas being lower because it doesn't have as many contaminants. It doesn't produce as much carbon in the air. I guess you could call it cleaner burning. Coal mining, this would be a giant strip mine. As a result of that, we have acid drainage. When the water rains on it, the water's got to go somewhere. And so what does it do? It causes an amount of acid drainage, acid water into the environment. Mountaintop removal, a big example of this. It can actually cause a lot of damage to regular ecosystems and trying to recover from this type of thing. Human health, obviously, black lung disease, other things lead to issues. Then you have the whole being buried underground. That's an issue. But we are starting to see less of this, in the sense that coal mining is reducing in the United States, just because we're starting to see other sources of energy being subsidized. Again, negative impacts on ANWR. If we go drill there, vegetation, air quality, water quality, habitat fragmentation, roads being put in, all of these things are an issue. And so we have to be understanding of that and understanding if that's the choice we make. Again, hopefully we've kind of subsided that and that won't happen. We are dependent upon foreign energy. And if you look at production versus consumption, we are off the chart. We are off the chart. And so you look at Saudi Arabia, they produce more than they could ever need. Iran the same, Venezuela is the same. And so we see that we're living beyond our means. I think I mentioned this earlier, the embargo of the 70s. OPEC, the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, basically they turned the oil producing screws off. And so when I was a kid in 1970s, the price of gas was much, much more than it ever was here. But I also remember personally buying 65-cent gasoline. My dad used to buy nickel and a quarter, nickel to a quarter gasoline when he was a kid. And so if we think about where the value of the dollar as compared to now and then, and we think about what we're paying and what happened, basically the oil embargo raised gas up to a price that was like $13, $14. When we shut down an oil refinery or offshore drilling, it causes oil prices to go up. If there's volatility in the Middle East or in Venezuela, it causes oil prices to go up. If we look at our policy, we as a country are able to create policy and that affects our petroleum reserves. We have a petroleum stockpile in case there was an issue. We have petroleum in caves underground in Louisiana for us to use. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is something in case of an emergency type situation. If we look at global trade, definitely we are using more than we are giving away. The Middle East, Venezuela, these guys are producing much more, and so trade is lopsided. Basically, if we look at ANWR and what happens up there, even though each citizen of Alaska is paid a check by the petroleum industry for just living there, a dividend check, it may not help them, and it may not trickle down. So basically, damage is done, and it's a lasting issue, and people, the most grotesquely polluted group of people in the world are Inuit populations and native populations in these rural areas, because what happens is they're based on a high fat subsistence diet, and what happens is the things like the mercury and the cadmium and the lead and all these other things are fat soluble, so they're concentrated in fat, and so these people are getting all of these pollution from these places that they've never been to. And so when the gas goes up in the air, the pollution goes up in the air, it falls down onto the planet in these rural areas due to our jet stream, due to our convection currents. And so what ends up happening is they're subjected to all the industrial pollution, and it's not fair. How are we going to convert to renewable energies? Obviously, subsidies have been going on to try and to kickstart that for fossil fuels, getting rid of fossil fuels. And so solar energy and wind energy are two great examples of that, to try and cut the straw, if you will. So we are constantly relied on fossil fuels, and it is a feedback loop. So the more we get, the more we use, the worse our conditions get. So we have to find a way to get away from that. Energy conservation, basically us practicing reducing energy and being able to use our energy more efficiently. And so by doing all that, we'll not only extend the length of time our fossil fuels are around, we'll be less wasteful, and then we'll reduce impact. And so good stuff, makes good things happen. If we talk about where we're at as far as conservation is concerned, we need to find ways to improve our fuel economy. We've lived large for too long. And so basically we're starting to see more and more change as far as how we look at our fuel sources and how we're taxing them. And so as we look at the cost per gallon, like in Europe and some other countries, the cost per gallon in the United States is extremely low. And so as we start to see increased cost, I think reduction of use of it will increase. And so it's hard to buy $4 gasoline and diesel fuel and just take a trip to the store. You start to think about it. And so as prices go up, we start to see more consumption going down. CAFE standards, it's kind of interesting. Corporate average fuel efficiency is CAFE. And basically it's what kind of a mileage to the gallon are you getting? Interestingly enough, we're seeing them play this card where they're able to produce less efficient vehicles because they have a fleet. And so they're looking at this over the entire fleet. And so they'll produce these big SUVs and then find hybrids that are getting 65, 70 miles a gallon and doing that. We're not going to fill our need by drilling in ANWR. It's just that simple. And so I don't really know why they're wanting to do it other than it's an immediate, I can do it because I can. If we look at where we're at, for me, I'm constantly trying to find ways to be more efficient with what I do in my vehicles, in my home. Our thermostat's at 60, 66 on most days, 68 when we're at home during the day at the maximum. And then if you think about in the summertime, we have our thermostat set to 79 degrees. And so you're going, well, that's not as cold as it could be, and it's not as hot as it could be. Well, again, that's what we're trying to do. When you leave the room, shut the light off, find ways to be more efficient. And we see this happening. Cogeneration buildings, we see that all the time. Same thing with our hybrid engines, right? Whether it's electric motor and a gasoline power engine, and where the brakes are producing the electricity, and it's like this in cars. Most of the energy is produced in taking off the very beginning. Once it gets to the point where it's running, then it's more efficient. And so start up and start off are the two most inefficient times. And so the electric battery gets you to where you're moving, saves a lot of energy. If we look at our home, we can take a look at our house, thermal imaging. You don't want a home too tight though, because it can produce some problems, especially with water vapor. And so there is a little bit of leakage designed there on purpose, but the more efficient your house is, whether through appliances or insulation or roof or whatever, the better off you are, the more savings in your pocket. We need to be able to find a way to conserve. And, if we can find ways to stretch what we have, it's better than trying to find new reserves. And so we have to switch our way of thinking. In conclusion, basically, our society was built on fossil fuels. We're at a turning point. We have to find a way to get away from that. And so basically we're finding alternative energy sources, and they're out there and they do well, but it's going to take some time and we have to subsidize them. But we can't wait until all of the rest of it's gone. And so what we will see is more and more and more renewable energies starting to take over and really help us out of this situation, hopefully before it's all gone. So with that, I know it was long and I know there was a couple breaks in there, and I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for being awesome in all you do. I appreciate you, and keep on doing amazing things because you guys are champions.